My heart paused for an eternity as my eyes crossed the street, locking onto him standing at the corner, the afternoon light hitting him in a strange way that bathed him in an almost unreal aura. A sudden, sharp, and completely unexpected sensation struck me deep in my soul, as if I had just recognized something my brain insisted was entirely new, a missing piece of a puzzle I didn't even know I was missing. I had stepped out to buy some groceries, the crumpled shopping list in my hand, the familiar rhythm of the city around me, the distant hum of traffic, the smell of hot asphalt mixed with freshly cut leaves from a nearby garden, a scene as ordinary as breathing. But in that moment, everything around me seemed to fade, losing importance in the face of his still figure. His hair was a shade that the sun turned into burnished gold, falling in a way that felt familiar, though I was absolutely certain I had never seen him before in my life. The way he leaned casually against the brick wall, watching the streets, movement with a pensive expression, conveyed a quietness that paradoxically stirred everything inside me. I couldn't look away, even though a rational part of me screamed to keep moving, to not stand there like a fool staring at a stranger. But the attraction was magnetic, almost violent in its intensity, an invisible force pulling me in his direction. It wasn't just curiosity, it was something deeper, a distant echo of a feeling I thought I had buried long ago under layers of time and forced resilience. He, in turn, slowly lifted his head, as if sensing my gaze, and our eyes met across the small crowd and passing cars. The contact was brief but intense, and in that fleeting moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. With me, there was no explicit recognition in his eyes, just a restrained surprise, perhaps a spark of reciprocal curiosity. But for me, it was like being struck by lightning, an electric charge coursing through my body from head to toe, leaving a persistent tingling in my fingertips. I felt my cheeks flush and had to force myself to break eye contact, turning my face abruptly, my heart pounding wildly in my chest like a caged bird. I kept walking, my steps slightly unsteady, the shopping list now, forgotten in my trembling hand, his image seared into my mind. The smell of asphalt and leaves felt more vivid now. The city sounds louder, as if my senses had been sharpened by that unexpected encounter. I wondered who he was, where he came from, and why his mere presence had managed to disrupt the calm I had worked so hard to achieve. There was something about him, an essence that reminded me of what? The question hung in the air, unanswered, a seed of mystery planted in my mind, promising to bloom into something complex and perhaps painful. I knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that that brief moment at the corner wouldn't be the end, but only the beginning of something I couldn't yet name, a familiar melody playing in an unfamiliar rhythm, and I was suddenly both eager and terrified to hear the rest of the song. The monotonous routine had been shattered, replaced by a feverish anticipation, a longing to discover why this stranger seemed so intimately tied to my own story, even though I had no idea who he really was. The rest of that afternoon was a blur of disjointed thoughts, his image overlaying everything, an intrusive figure in the familiar landscape of my mind. I returned home with the grocery bag still half empty, the list forgotten in some pocket, feeling strangely displaced, as if the ground beneath my feet had shifted. The quiet of my apartment, once a welcome refuge, now felt empty, echoing the restlessness he had awakened in me. I tried to distract myself, turning on the TV to some random channel, flipping through a book, but nothing held my attention for more than a few minutes before my thoughts drifted back to the corner where I saw him, to the way the light outlined him, to that moment our eyes met. There was something in him, a depth in his eyes, a slight curve to his lips when he almost smiled back, that seemed to call forth a memory that didn't exist, an echo of a touch or a voice I couldn't place. In the days that followed, the feeling lingered, a melody I couldn't get out of my head. With every street I turned, I felt a foolish expectation of seeing him again. It was on Wednesday, during lunch, that it happened. I was sitting alone at a small diner near my workplace, the steam from my hot coffee fogging up my glasses, watching the light rain starting to fall outside when the door opened and he walked in. The air seemed to vibrate again. He didn't see me right away, ordering something at the counter. The carefree way he shook the excess moisture from his hair was familiar in a way that left me unsettled. My heart raced, the same frantic rhythm as that first encounter. I watched his every movement, the way he picked up his coffee cup, the slight tilt of his head as he listened to something the cashier said. Everything felt right and at the same time, completely new. When he turned to find a seat, our eyes met for the second time. This time, he held my gaze a moment longer, and a genuine, gentle smile spread across his face, a smile that sent a wave of warmth through my body. He walked toward me, and for a second, I feared he might say something, breaking the aura of mystery surrounding him, but he only grabbed a napkin from an empty table near mine and nodded slightly before sitting a few tables away. It was a simple gesture, but meaningful. A small interaction that confirmed the connection I felt wasn't one-sided, or at least that I wasn't invisible to him. I caught myself smiling back, a silly, involuntary smile I hadn't given in a long time, feeling a strange lightness in my chest, mixed with persistent confusion about who he was and why he affected me so deeply. The noisy diner, the smell of grease and coffee, the rain outside, all formed the backdrop to the simple yet profound disturbance this man caused in my life, awakening something I didn't know still existed within me, a longing for a closeness that he, a total stranger, seemed to promise without saying a single word. That smile in the diner stayed with me for days, resurfacing at the most unexpected moments, a constant reminder of the delightful disruption he had brought into my life. I found myself smiling at nothing, reliving the brief encounter, trying to decipher what it was about him that felt so familiar, yet so new and thrilling. The initial curiosity had turned into something stronger, a growing desire to know more about this mysterious man who could pull me out of my bubble of monotony with a single glance. I began subtly changing my habits, taking different routes to work, visiting the diner at varied times in the foolish hope of running into him again. It wasn't a calculated plan, just an irresistible inclination, an impulse that seemed to come from a part of me I had forgotten existed. Each day without seeing him was a small disappointment. Each potential glimpse of a similar figure in the distance made my heart race, only to slow when I realized it wasn't him. I was chasing a ghost of the present, someone real and tangible, yet whose essence seemed to evoke a past I couldn't access. It was at an art gallery downtown on a rainy Thursday evening that fate, or perhaps my silent persistence, acted again. I was distractedly looking at an abstract painting that seemed to reflect the chaos of my own mind when I felt that same unmistakable presence. I turned, and there he was, a few meters away, studying a sculpture with an intensity that made me hold my breath. This time he noticed my presence almost instantly. A recognition passed through his eyes, the same restrained surprise from our first encounter, quickly followed by that smile I was already beginning to crave. He approached slowly, and for the first time, I heard his voice. It was deep, soft, with a slight rasp that sounded strangely like music to my ears, and he said something simple about the sculpture, a banal observation that, coming from him, felt remarkably insightful and interesting. I responded, my voice a little shaky, feeling that electricity between us stronger than ever. We talked for a few minutes there in the gallery about art, the city, light, and superficial things, but every word exchanged seemed to carry an invisible weight, a tacit promise of something deeper. He introduced himself. His name was something I felt I should know, but it reached my ears as a welcome novelty. I said my name, Elowen, and he repeated it, the sound of my name on his lips sending another shiver through me. There was no mention of our previous brief encounter, just the feeling of two strangers meeting for the first time. But to me, it felt like we were merely resuming a conversation interrupted centuries ago. When he had to leave, there was a mutual hesitation, a charged moment of silence before he said goodbye, with a look that promised a future. And as he walked away, leaving me in the middle of the gallery with my heart racing and my mind reeling, I knew that whoever he was, I was falling for him. Again, without the slightest idea why or who he really was to me. Act 1 was complete. The encounter at the gallery was the catalyst that turned curiosity into something tangible, opening the door for him, with his enigmatic smile and soft voice, to fully enter my life. We exchanged phone numbers that night, a simple, modern gesture that sealed the unspoken agreement that we wanted to know each other better. The first messages were tentative, then more frequent, filled with light banter and mutual discoveries. That felt surprisingly easy, as if we were picking up a conversation that had never truly stopped. He suggested coffee that weekend, and I accepted without hesitation, feeling an excitement I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. Each subsequent meeting, whether for brunch at a cozy cafe overlooking a bustling street, a leisurely walk through a sunny park where children laughed and dogs ran, or dinner at a lively, noisy place, solidified the sense that he wasn't just an interesting stranger, but someone I connected with on a level beyond the surface. There was an ease in his presence, a silent comfort even in the pauses in conversation, as if we were speaking a language only the two of us understood. Learned about his taste in music, his work, which he described with a restrained passion that captivated me, and small habits of his that made me smile. With each new discovery, the sense of familiarity grew, no longer unsettling but warming me from within, like a heat that spread slowly. He had a way of tilting his head when thinking that felt so, I couldn't find the right word. And the sound of his laugh, a rough, genuine sound, unlocked something in me I thought was permanently sealed. I found myself sharing details of my life, my fears, my dreams, with an openness that surprised me. It was as if I had known him for years, confiding things I kept to myself, and he listened with genuine attention, asking questions that showed he truly cared. Weeks turned into months, and the initial attraction gave way to deep affection, a desire to be near him, to share my days, the good and the bad. Mornings felt brighter, knowing I might get a message from him. Nights more peaceful after hearing his voice on the phone. I was falling in love. There was no doubt in my heart. It was a new, fresh feeling, yet strangely recycled, as if the foundations were already there, just waiting for him to rebuild something beautiful upon them. The irony of it all escaped me completely at the time. I was simply living the experience of falling for a man who seemed perfect for me, who made me happy in a way I had forgotten was possible. It was the start of something real and powerful, a new love story unfolding under the California sun or the lights of New York or wherever we were, and the old story, the one he was part of without my knowing, remained a distant, painful memory, entirely disconnected from the present happiness he brought me. Act 2 had begun, propelled by the irresistible force of a rediscovered feeling in anonymity. As the months progressed and our relationship deepened, he became the center of my world, the anchor in a reality that for a long time had felt adrift. We built routines together, small rituals that belonged only to us. Lazy Sunday mornings with pancakes and strong coffee, movie nights on the cozy couch, silent walks at dusk through tree-lined streets where streetlights began to glow. I felt completely at ease with him, an ease I never thought I'd find again. We shared laughter, comfortable silences, and the intimacy growing between us felt like the most natural thing in the world, as if we were made for each other. It was a calm, deep love, built on a solid foundation of mutual respect and affection, and I gave myself to it without reservation, happy to have finally found my place. Yet beneath the tranquil surface of our happiness, an undercurrent persisted, an uneasy sense that something was missing, a dissonant note in an otherwise perfect symphony, sometimes a gesture of his, the way he rolled up his shirt sleeve, the way he furrowed his brow when focused, or a casual phrase he said without thinking, hit me with a wave of familiarity so strong I almost gasped. It was like hearing an echo from a past life, a whisper of something I knew intimately but couldn't recall where or when. I tried to ignore it, attributing it to coincidences or the strength of our current connection, but the feeling returned, subtle and insistent. Once, we were at a charming antique shop in a nearby town, and he stopped in front of an old object, a small porcelain trinket with a particular design. He picked it up with unexpected care and said, more to himself than to me, "I remember this." The comment went almost unnoticed, but the way he said it, the fleeting melancholy in his eyes, resonated with me in a strange and unsettling way, awakening a sense of loss I couldn't tie to that moment or to him. I began to pay closer attention, observing him for clues, not because I distrusted him, but because I felt there was a part of his story, or ours, that was hidden, hovering at the edge of my consciousness. I asked casually about his past, his family, his childhood, but he answered vaguely without delving too deeply, which at the time I attributed to his reserved nature. But now, with the growing frequency of these echoes, his hesitation felt more significant. It was as if he were protecting something, or perhaps just avoiding reopening old wounds. The joy of the present was slowly being tinged by this shadow of mystery and inexplicable familiarity, creating a silent tension that only I seemed to feel fully. I loved him deeply, this man with whom I was building a new life, but the persistent sense that I knew him in a way my present couldn't explain was starting to erode the edges of my happiness, gently pushing me toward a truce I couldn't yet conceive. Act 2, in its middle, was becoming a delicate dance between surrendering to the present love and the unease of a forgotten past, a past that seemed increasingly determined to make itself present. The sense of familiarity was no longer a gentle undercurrent, but a rising tide, threatening to drown me, making the moments of peace in our routine increasingly hard to maintain. I loved him with an intensity that caught me by surprise every day. But the strange disconnect between the depth of my current feelings and the complete absence of a shared history before a few months ago gnawed at me from within. I began noticing details I had previously overlooked, small objects in his apartment, stories he told about places he'd visited or people he'd met, searching for any crumb that might explain why he seemed to fill a space in me that existed long before I met him. It was a silent, solitary quest I kept hidden from him, fearing he might think I was paranoid or unsatisfied with what we had. But the need to understand was stronger than the fear. That strange familiarity was an enigma I desperately needed to solve. The breaking point came on a rainy Saturday. We were at his apartment, sheltered from the bad weather, and he was searching for an old book in a box at the back of the closet. He asked for my help, and as I rummaged through dusty papers and forgotten objects, my fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. I pulled out a small object, a worn silver keychain with an irregular shape I would recognize anywhere. It was the keychain I had made years ago, with our initials intertwined, mine and his. The air left my lungs in a ragged gasp. My hands trembled as I held it, my eyes fixed on the engraved letters, fully aware that the initials there were mine and those of the man I had loved before, the man I thought I had lost forever. I slowly raised my gaze to him, who was on the other side of the box, oblivious to my discovery, still searching for his book. The world seemed to spin, the sounds around me distorted, and memories, once fragmented and unreachable, began to flood. Back. Images of a shared past, laughter, promises, pain, all colliding with the present reality of the man I loved now, standing just a few meters away. It was him. It had always been him. The man I had fallen for again, with whom I had built a new life, was the same man I thought I had left behind in another existence, though without knowing, shattered in a brutal instant, replaced by a flood of shock, confusion, and a piercing pain mixed with the overwhelming depth of the love I felt for him in that exact moment. The keychain slipped from my trembling hand, hitting the floor with a metallic sound that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. He looked up, sensing something was wrong, his searching expression giving way to concern as he saw the pallor of my face and my wide eyes fixed on him. Then, following my gaze, to the object on the floor. His own face paled, realization dawning. In his eyes, and in that instant, the secret was unveiled, the undeniable truth hanging in the heavy air between us, ready to determine the future of everything we had built in the present. Act 2 culminated here, in the moment of the terrible and wondrous discovery, the turning point that rewrote the story of our new and at the same time old connection. The silence broke with his voice, hesitant at first, then gaining a pained cadence as he began to speak, the truth unraveling in words that felt heavy and laden with regret. I listened, still paralyzed by shock, my eyes fixed on his face, which seemed a canvas where all conflicting emotions, past pain, fear of present loss, a faint hope, were painted. He told his version of the events that separated us years ago, a story I only knew half of, revealing depths of suffering and complex circumstances that had led him to disappear, to believe that stepping away, letting me move on without him, was the only option, no matter how much it destroyed him. He spoke of the weight of that decision, how he himself was lost for a time, about the struggle to rebuild his life elsewhere, carrying the invisible burden of our past. And then he came to the present, to how he found me again by chance, to my apparent happiness and peace he didn't want to disturb, but how the attraction was still there, strong and undeniable, and he couldn't help but get closer, hoping perhaps to be just an acquaintance in my new life. As his words floated in the air, painfully sincere, I grappled with the flood of emotions within me. The anger at his omission, the hurt of being kept in the dark, the renewed pain of the loss I had suffered, all collided with the understanding of the circumstances he faced, and most importantly, the deep and very real love I felt for him now. I looked at him and saw not only the man who broke my heart in the past, but the kind, thoughtful, vulnerable man standing before me, whose qualities I had rediscovered and loved again, regardless of who he had been. It was a cruel and beautiful paradox. Tears began to roll down my face, not just from sadness, but from the overwhelming complexity of the moment. It was him, Liam, my first love, and at the same time, it was him, the man I had fallen for a second time, the man I shared my life with now. The two realities merged into one, making it impossible to separate the past from the present. I interrupted. Him, my voice hoarse with emotion, not to accuse, but to express the confusion, the pain of being deceived, even if his reasons were complex, but also the undeniable truth of my current feelings. I told him about the strange familiarity, about the sense of being pulled toward him in a way I couldn't explain, about how easy and natural it was to be with him, about how I fell in love with the man he had become without knowing who he was before. The words poured out in a rush, a mix of pain and confession, the raw vulnerability of my heart laid bare. He listened, his eyes filled with mirrored pain. And in that moment, in that charged space between us, I realized that despite everything, despite the secret, despite the history that separated and reunited us in such a tortuous way, the feeling, that bound me to him was undeniable. His explanation, though painful to hear, opened a crack for the possibility of healing, placing the weight of our future in the hands of our ability to forgive the past and embrace the love that had been reborn. Against all odds, Act 3, in its middle, was the arena where the truth was confronted, and the real battle for love, the one that transcended memory and time, was being fought, with vulnerability as the only weapon. Time stretched and contracted after the words ceased, leaving behind the raw weight of the truth in the space once filled only by the intimacy of our rediscovered love. We stood there in the charged silence, the story of our past hanging like a dense fog, the pain and surprise still fresh in my mind, mingling with the overwhelming feeling I held for him in the present. My heart was in pieces, yet paradoxically, it also felt more whole than ever, aware of the complexity of this man I had loved twice, in two different lives that turned out to be the same. I looked at him again, truly looked, and saw beyond the hurt, beyond the secret, and found the sincerity in his eyes, the genuine regret, and above all, the love I knew he felt for me, both in the past and now. It was a love that had found its way back to me, against all odds, overcoming distance, time, and even my own lack of memory. The irony of the situation was profound. I had fallen for him again without knowing who he was, proving that the connection between us went beyond recollection, beyond circumstances. The decision wasn't easy or instantaneous. The pain of his omission was real, a wound that would need time to heal. But as I processed everything he said, everything I felt, and everything we had built together in the past weeks and months, I realized that the love binding us in the present was powerful, honest in its current manifestation, and it was on this love that we needed to focus. The past existed, yes, with its pains and secrets, but it didn't define who we were now. Liam, the man I had rediscovered, was the person who made me happy, who understood me without words, who filled my life with light in a way I hadn't thought possible again. And I loved him, not just for the nostalgic memory of what we were, but for who he was in this very moment, standing before me, vulnerable and real. I moved toward him, closing the physical distance the shock had created. I raised my hand and touched his face, feeling the familiar texture of his skin, the warmth radiating from him. His eyes closed for a moment at my touch, and I knew he felt the same, a mix of relief and apprehension, cautious hope. "We have a lot to talk about," I said, my voice still trembling, but now with a newfound strength. "A lot to heal. But I love you, Liam." The second time I said his name out loud after so long, and the second time I said I loved him, but this time aware of the entire story, of all its layers. His eyes opened, filled with tears, and he pulled me into a tight embrace, an embrace that held years of longing, regret, and love. It wasn't a magical ending where all wounds vanished instantly, but it was a beginning to rebuild, to trust again, to love with the complexity and richness that our unique story gave us. Love had indeed triumphed, not because it erased the past, but because it was strong enough to survive it, to flourish again in the blindness of rediscovery, and find its way back home, proving that some connections are eternal, waiting only for the right moment to manifest without knowing, until the truth strengthens them even further. Act 3 closed with an embrace, a commitment, and the certainty that our story was only just beginning to be truly written, with all its pages, old and new, finally reunited. Several months have passed since that rainy afternoon when the silver keychain unveiled the secret. Months filled with difficult conversations, tears, and a conscious effort from both sides to navigate the turbulent waters the truth had stirred. It wasn't easy. The hurt from his omission lingered for a while, a shadow between us. And and there were moments of doubt, questions about whether the love we had rediscovered could truly withstand the weight of the past that Liam carried alone, and that I, for so long, buried under layers of emotional amnesia. But in every honest conversation, in every moment of shared vulnerability, we found each other again, and the strength of our present bond proved more resilient than any pain the history could inflict. We talked about what happened after we parted, about the lives we lived without each other, about the reasons that led him to choose silence, and as I heard his full story, with all its nuances and suffering, the hurt gave way to a deeper understanding, and forgiveness, once a distant possibility, became a tangible reality, a gift we gave each other every day. Our routine returned, but tinged with a new layer of meaning. Familiar gestures now carried the weight of memory and recognition. The way he rolled up his shirt sleeve was no longer just familiar. It was a tender reminder of the summers we spent together years ago. The sound of his laugh evoked both the joy of the present and the gentle nostalgia of times past. The love I felt for him without knowing merged with the love I felt for him before, creating a richer, more complete feeling that encompassed our entire story, with its lights and shadows. The silver keychain, once a symbol of secrecy and pain, now sat on our bedside table, a silent reminder of the winding journey our love had taken to find its way back home. He was no longer just the man I had fallen for again. He was Liam, my Liam, the only man I seemed destined to love, not once, but twice in this life. Today, sitting together on the couch, the silence between us is not one of mystery or secrecy, but of comfort and mutual acceptance. The afternoon sun streams through the window, illuminating the dust suspended in the air and the familiar outline of his face. I take his hand, and he squeezes mine back, a simple gesture that seals a profound understanding. The journey was long and unexpected, full of twists and turns I never foresaw when I stepped out to buy coffee that morning. But looking back at everything we've been through, at the strange and wonderful way fate brought us back to each other, I know, with a certainty that permeates every cell of my being, that love truly triumphed. It conquered time, distance, secrecy, and even the loss of memory. It triumphed because it was real, resilient, and because we had the courage to choose it, not once, but twice. And this second chance, with the baggage of the past and the promise of the future, felt even more precious for having been found, lost, and found again, proving that some love stories are strong enough to rewrite their own beginning.